On Easter Sunday, my daughter-in-law changed my seat at dinner, and at first I told myself it meant nothing. Families make little adjustments all the time. A different chair, a different plate, a different view of the table. But when I sat down in the place she chose for me, I saw exactly what she had been trying to keep from me. And that was the moment I realized this dinner had never really been about Easter at all. Before I tell you the rest, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end, because some betrayals do not arrive with raised voices. They arrive wrapped in linen napkins and polished silver, looking almost thoughtful. I have always loved Easter dinner. Even after my husband Frank died 3 years ago, I kept the holiday the way we always had. I still glazed the ham with brown sugar and cloves. I still made the sweet potato casserole with toasted marshmallows on top, because Daniel loved it when he was a boy. I still arranged fresh lilies in a glass vase, even though their scent always made me think of church basements, spring rain, and the soft grip of Frank's hand at the small of my back. That year, Daniel and his wife Brooke insisted on hosting. They said it would be easier with the children at home, and I let them have that. I arrived just before 4 o'clock carrying my casserole in a warm glass dish wrapped in 2 thick kitchen towels. Their house looked lovely. Pastel ribbons on the porch wreath. Plastic eggs scattered across the backyard lawn. The windows cracked open to let in the cool April air. From the driveway, I could hear my granddaughter Sophie laughing, and for one small hopeful moment, I believed the day might still feel like family. Brooke opened the door wearing a pale yellow dress and the sort of smile that looked practiced before it looked warm. Daniel kissed my cheek, took the casserole from my hands, and thanked me for bringing too much food, the way he always did. Inside, the table was already set with cream-colored napkins, gold-rimmed plates, and little ceramic rabbits between the serving bowls. It was beautiful. And then I saw my place card. 4 years I had sat beside the china cabinet, halfway down the right side of the table directly across from my son. Brooke had moved me to the very end near the kitchen door, where plates came and went and no real conversation ever stayed long. "Oh," I said gently, "I thought I usually sat over there." Brooke touched my arm again. "I changed things around a little," she said. "This just works better." I nodded and took my seat. From there, I could no longer look Daniel in the eye without turning my whole body. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that from the polished glass of the china cabinet, I could catch a reflection of the narrow sideboard behind his chair. On it sat an ivory folder, thick with papers, and next to it a legal pad turned partially away from the room. I could not read the writing, but I could see Brooke glance at it twice before we ever said grace. Since Frank passed, I had gotten into the habit of carrying important papers in my handbag. Not because I lived in fear. Simply because widowhood teaches a woman that people begin to speak around her future before they speak to her. I had not expected to need anything that evening. But as I folded my napkin into my lap and watched Brooke adjust the serving spoons with almost theatrical precision, I understood something simple and cold. That chair had not been moved for comfort. It had been moved to move me. The children came in first from the backyard, cheeks pink from the cool air, baskets swinging from their wrists. Sophie was 11 now, old enough to notice moods adults wished to hide, and little Mason still had grass on one knee of his khaki pants from kneeling in the yard. Their laughter filled the dining room in quick bright bursts, and for a moment the house sounded the way a holiday house should sound. But Brooke kept glancing toward the sideboard behind Daniel, as if checking that nothing there had shifted out of place. Daniel bowed his head for grace and we all followed. He thanked God for family, for blessings, for another Easter together. I kept my eyes lowered, but I was not praying as much as listening. There is a difference between peace and control, and by 68 a woman knows the sound of both. When we lifted our heads, Brooke served the ham with careful efficiency. Daniel first, then the children, then herself, then me. Could have been nothing. 100 people would have called it nothing. But Frank used to say that if you really wanted to know who held power at a table, you did not listen to the speeches. You watched who was served first, who was interrupted, and who was expected to adjust without complaint. Sophie smiled across the table and held up a pink plastic egg. "I saved this one for you, Grandma," she said. "I know pink is your favorite." My heart softened. "That was sweet of you, honey," I said. Brooke laughed lightly. "Pink does suit your generation." Daniel let out a faint chuckle and reached for the dinner rolls, and I buttered mine slowly without answering. Some insults are delivered so politely that everyone in the room is invited to pretend they were jokes. The meal continued in that same polished rhythm. Brooke complimented my casserole with the faint surprise of someone who had expected less. Daniel talked about work, a new expansion, a meeting in Columbus, something about numbers and timelines. The children asked for more marshmallows from the sweet potatoes. I answered when spoken to, smiled when expected, and watched the reflection in the china cabinet whenever Brooke thought no one was paying attention. Once, while Daniel helped Mason cut his ham, Brooke stepped behind his chair and turned the ivory folder slightly away from the room. If I had been sitting in my old place, I would not have seen it at all. That was when I understood the arrangement more clearly. She had not moved me because she wanted a better flow for dinner. She had moved me away from my son and away from any chance to read the room before she directed it. She wanted me at the edge of the table, where concern sounds like authority and surprises are harder to challenge. I took a slow sip of iced tea and let the cold settle on my tongue. Then Daniel set down his napkin before anyone had finished eating. It was the gesture of a man about to say something he had rehearsed. Brooke folded her hands beside her plate and turned toward me with that same controlled, careful smile. "Evelyn," she said softly, "since everyone is here, there is something we have been meaning to talk with you about." For a second no one moved. The faint clink of Mason's fork against his plate seemed too loud in the stillness, and somewhere outside, a neighbor's wind chime carried through the open window. Brooke sat straight, composed, as if she were about to lead a church committee instead of an ambush. Daniel stared at the table runner instead of my face. I set down my glass carefully and gave them the small, polite smile women like me learn to wear when we already know something unpleasant is coming. "Of course," I said. "What is it?" Brooke glanced at Daniel, offering him the chance to begin. When he did not, she leaned forward. "We have all been thinking about you," she said. "Especially lately. You have been through so much since Frank passed, and we want to make sure you are not carrying more than you should alone." Her voice was soft, almost tender. That made it worse. Real concern has warmth in it. This had polish. "That is kind," I said. "I manage well enough." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, it is not that we think you cannot manage. It is just that the house is a lot for one person. The yard, the stairs, the upkeep. We have been talking about what might make more sense long term." There it was. Not a question. A conclusion dressed as care. I let a few seconds pass. "Long term is an interesting phrase," I said. "Especially over Easter ham." Sophie looked up. Brooke gave a quick laugh. "No one is trying to upset you, Evelyn. We only thought it would be smart to discuss practical options while everyone is together." As she said it, her eyes moved for a fraction of a second toward the sideboard, toward the folder. I followed the glance and then looked back at her. "Practical options," I repeated. "I see." Daniel reached behind him, took the ivory folder, and set it on the table between us. He did not slide it to me. He placed it within Brooke's reach, as though even now she should control the pace. "There is no pressure," he said quickly, which is what people say when pressure is exactly what they are applying. Brooke rested 2 fingers on the folder and smiled again. "We found a lovely community in Westerville," she said. "It is 20 minutes from us. Small cottages, transportation, light housekeeping, activities, meals if you want them. It really is beautiful." I looked at the folder, then at the empty space where my usual seat should have been. The insult of the evening sharpened all at once. She had not simply moved my chair. She had moved me out of position before presenting a future in which I would be moved out of my home as well. I did not touch the folder. Instead, I looked at Daniel the way I used to when he was 9 years old and trying to hide a broken lamp behind his back. He had never been good at deception. Even now at 42, it sat awkwardly on him. Brooke, on the other hand, wore control as naturally as lipstick. "That is thoughtful," I said evenly. "But I do not recall asking to be relocated." Brooke tilted her head, all sympathy and patience. "No one is relocating you. We are only suggesting something easier. Less stress. Less maintenance. A fresh start. A fresh start." People love clean, cheerful phrases when they are trying to erase something that matters to someone else. My house was not a burden handed to me by accident. Frank and I bought it when Daniel was 8, After 3 cramped apartments and years of saving every spare dollar we could, I still remembered the first night there, eating Chinese takeout on the living room floor because the furniture had not arrived yet. Frank leaned against the wall, looked around the empty room and said, "This is it, Evie. This is where our life gets to stay." And it had stayed there. In the pencil marks inside the pantry door where we measured Daniel every birthday. In the chipped brick by the front step where Frank dropped a wrench one summer fixing the porch rail. In the dogwood tree we planted the week Daniel graduated high school. A life does not become less real simply because the people who built it grow older. I looked down at my plate, at the sweet potatoes cooling near the edge, and another memory rose up. Thanksgiving 2 years before, when Brooke had sweetly suggested I sit in the breakfast nook because the kids need more space at the big table. Christmas the year after that, when she moved my chair beside the hallway, because she wanted a cleaner background for the family photos. Daniel said nothing then too. He only carried my water glass from one place to another, as if a careful hand could make displacement feel loving. A single moment can be excused. Pattern is harder to ignore. "You have put a great deal of thought into this," I said. Brooke smiled, mistaking calm for agreement. "We only want what is best." I lifted my eyes to hers. "That is interesting," I said quietly, "because people who truly want what is best usually begin by asking what the other person wants." The room changed after that. Not loudly, not dramatically, but I felt it. Daniel sat back. Sophie stopped folding her napkin into tiny squares. Even Mason, too young to understand the words, seemed to sense that the sweetness had gone out of the air. Brooke kept one hand on the folder, but for the first time that evening, she did not look certain. Brooke withdrew her hand from the folder and folded both palms in her lap, as if she were generously allowing me space to process what had already been planned. Daniel gave me a strained smile. "Mom, nobody is saying you have to do anything today," he said. "We just thought it might help to start looking at options before something forces the issue." I let that sit between us. Before something forces the issue. Such a revealing phrase. Not if I wanted a change. Not whether I felt ready. Just the quiet assumption that my life was already leaning toward an ending they had prepared for on my behalf. "And what exactly do these options include?" I asked. Brooke brightened at once, relieved to mistake restraint for cooperation. She opened the folder and took out a brochure, then another, and finally a printed market report. "There is a cottage community in Westerville," she said. "Safe, well-maintained, close to us. And with the market where it is, this could be the right time to simplify." Someone in her position knew better than to write anything as crude as a confession on paper, but people always reveal themselves if you give them enough space to explain their reasonableness. Daniel leaned forward. "You could sell while prices are still strong," he said. "The equity would set you up comfortably, and you would not have to worry about repairs. Last winter that furnace problem could have been serious." I almost smiled. When the furnace went out in January, Daniel had not come. Frank's old friend Walter had. 76 and still steady as oak, Walter arrived in a flannel coat with a toolbox and had the pilot assembly working again in less than an hour. Daniel knew that. Brooke knew it too. But facts are rarely useful to people building a case. Brooke smoothed the market report with her fingertips. "The point is not just maintenance," she said. "It is planning. If there is good equity left after your transition, that gives the family more stability later. College emergencies, things like that. We all have to think ahead." There it was. Not written in ink. Spoken aloud over Easter dinner, as cleanly as if she were discussing weather. I looked at her for a long moment. "So this is not only about my comfort," I said. Daniel blinked. "Brooke," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," she replied, still too smooth, still too fast. "We are all connected. If your mother is in a safer, easier place and there is money left over, then yes, that helps the family. I do not see why that is offensive." I folded my napkin neatly beside my plate. The children had gone very quiet. Sophie was looking from me to her father to Brooke with the wounded alertness of a child old enough to understand betrayal without yet knowing the vocabulary for it. I lifted my eyes to Brooke and held them there. "That is why you moved my seat," I said. "You did not want me beside Daniel when this little presentation began. You wanted me at the far end where I could be managed more easily. No one answered. They did not need to. By then, the truth was sitting at the table more openly than any of us. Daniel looked at me as if he had only just stepped into the room and discovered what dinner was really about. The color in his face shifted, not dramatically, but enough for a mother to see. He turned to Brooke with a frown that belonged more to confusion than courage. You told me this was about making things easier for Mom, he said. Brooke did not flinch. It is. Daniel, do not make this uglier than it is. We are trying to be realistic. Realistic. Another clean little word people use when they want you to accept something cruel without raising your voice. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip, letting the silence do what silence does best. It made room for everyone to hear themselves clearly. Sophie spoke before any of the adults could. Dad, she said quietly, Grandma always sits by the cabinet. Mom changed all the cards this afternoon. Brooke turned so quickly the pearl at her ear flashed in the light. Sophie, this is not your concern. But children know when truth enters a room. They might not understand property taxes or market reports, but they understand when someone kind is being cornered. Sophie lowered her eyes, yet she did not look ashamed. She looked sad. Daniel rubbed a hand over his mouth. Brooke, he said, did you already speak to somebody about the house? I asked for a market comparison, she said. That is not the same as listing it. I set down my glass. A market comparison done without my knowledge is still a step taken behind my back. Brooke turned to me again. No one is taking anything from you. We are trying to prevent a situation where something happens and decisions have to be made in a panic. A panic, I said, would be a phone call after a fall, a burst pipe, a trip to the emergency room. This was a brochure at Easter dinner. No one replied. The lilies in the center of the table had opened more fully in the warmth of the room, their white petals curling back with slow elegance. Frank used to say flowers are honest because they never pretend to be anything other than what they are. I wished I could say the same for the people around them. Mason pushed peas around his plate with the back of his fork, sensing tension without understanding it. I softened my voice when I spoke again. I think the children have heard enough for one evening. Daniel nodded almost immediately, grateful for direction the way he had been as a boy. Sophie. Mason, why do you not take your baskets upstairs and sort your candy? They slid from their chairs. Sophie paused beside me for half a second, long enough to rest her small hand on my shoulder. It was such a simple gesture, but I felt it all the way through me. When the children had gone, the room changed again. No laughter from the backyard. No rustle of candy wrappers. Only the four of us and the truth laid out too soon. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at my son. Now, I said, I would like to know exactly how long this has been in motion. Daniel did not answer right away. He looked at Brooke first, and that told me more than any sentence could have. A man with nothing to hide looks toward the truth. A man led by someone else looks toward the person who arranged the script. Brooke sat still, spine straight, hands folded, her expression composed in the way some women practice in mirrors without ever admitting it. Finally Daniel exhaled. We started talking about it after Christmas, he said. Only talking at first. After Christmas. For months. For months of discussions, market reports, brochures, and rehearsed concern while I had been sending birthday cards, dropping off banana bread for the children, and answering Brooke's messages with more kindness than she had ever earned. Only talking, I repeated. And when did the real estate numbers begin? Daniel swallowed. Brooke answered for him. Last month. I asked a friend for a comparison. That is not the same as making a move. No, I said. It is the step before that. Her jaw tightened just slightly. She had expected resistance, I think, but not precision. People like Brooke count on older women to be emotional, vague, easily dismissed. They do not know what to do when we are calm and exact. Daniel stared at the table. Mom, I never agreed to force anything, he said. I thought we were preparing. I looked at him for a long moment. Do you know what preparation looks like when it is done with respect? I asked. It looks like a conversation in my living room. It looks like asking whether I have plans of my own. It looks like treating me like the woman who raised you, not a problem to be solved between side dishes. The words landed harder than if I had shouted. Brooke shifted in her chair. "This is becoming unfair," she said. "We are the ones trying to help, and somehow we are being painted as villains." I nearly smiled at that. Villains always resent being described accurately. "No one painted anything," I said. "You brought brochures to Easter dinner. You ran numbers on my home without my consent. You framed my equity as a family asset before you ever asked how I wanted to live. I am only reading the picture you placed in front of me." For the first time all evening, Brooke looked away. Her eyes moved toward the staircase, perhaps thinking of how much Sophie had heard. Then she looked back at me and said more quietly, "We cannot keep pretending time does not move, Evelyn." I folded my hands more tightly in my lap. "Time moves for all of us," I said. "But dignity should move with it." Then I turned to Daniel. "Did your father ever tell you to speak with Mr. Bellamy if questions about the house came up?" The question changed the room. Daniel blinked. Brooke looked sharply from him to me. "He mentioned that Mr. Bellamy had everything in order," Daniel said slowly. "But I never asked for details. That was all I needed to hear." Brooke had planned many things. She had just never planned for Frank. Daniel went completely still. For a moment, even Brooke forgot the careful posture she had been holding all evening. "What exactly did he put in order?" she asked, turning toward Daniel with a sharpness she had tried very hard to hide. He looked at me, then at the folder, then back at Brooke. "Dad told me that if there were ever questions about Mom's living situation, Mr. Bellamy had the house papers and that things were protected." I thought he meant the will. "Frank was never careless with words," I said. I opened my handbag and removed the cream envelope I had carried for years, not because I expected to need it that night, but because widowhood had taught me that important truths should travel close. Frank's handwriting was still steady across the front. "Evelyn, if anyone ever mistakes your kindness for weakness." I placed it on the table, not dramatically, just firmly enough that no one could pretend it was not there. Daniel stared at it as if he had not seen it in a very long time. "Dad told me there were arrangements," he said again, quieter now. "I did not know the structure." "Then perhaps," I said, "you should have asked before planning mine." I unfolded Frank's letter and the second document behind it, printed on Mr. Bellamy's stationery. In the months before he died, Frank had transferred the house into a living trust for my lifetime use, with clear terms. No sale, refinancing, transfer, or residence change could be initiated by anyone but me without direct legal review and my written request. After my lifetime, the house would be sold according to instructions that belonged to another day, not this one. I slid the attorney's letter toward Daniel. "Read the first paragraph out loud." His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the page. Brooke leaned closer, but she did not touch it. Daniel read in a low voice that the property was secured for my residence, autonomy, and exclusive decision-making for the remainder of my natural life, and that any effort to pressure relocation for financial advantage would violate the trust's intent. When he finished, the room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Brooke's lips parted, then closed again. She had built an entire evening around the idea that I was sentimental, isolated, and easy to guide. What she had not accounted for was Frank. She had never understood that the quietest man in the room had also been the one who thought 5 steps ahead. I folded my hands over my bag and looked at them both. "So now we may speak plainly," I said. "I am not leaving my home. Not this spring. Not because a brochure suggests it. Not because numbers were run behind my back. And certainly not because Easter dinner was chosen as the stage for it." Daniel lowered the letter and covered his eyes for a moment with one hand. Brooke said nothing. For the first time since I arrived, she looked like someone who had lost control of the room, and once that happens, the truth has a way of entering all on its own. Daniel kept staring at the attorney's letter as if it might rearrange itself into something easier if he looked long enough. But paper is often more honest than people. It does not soften the truth to spare feelings. It does not pretend a plan was kindness when it was convenience dressed in pastel colors and practical words. Brooke was the first to move. She sat back in her chair and folded her arms, no longer graceful, only guarded. "So that is it then," she said. "You are going to turn this into some moral indictment because we tried to talk about reality." I looked at her for a moment before answering. "No. You turned it into that when you chose a holiday table over a private conversation, when you ran numbers on my home without asking me, and when you treated my life as if it were an asset to be managed. Daniel lowered the page and rubbed his forehead. He looked tired in a way I had not seen before, as though the evening had finally stripped away the comfort of letting someone else do his thinking for him. "Mom," he said quietly, "I am sorry." Brooke turned to him at once. "For what?" "For trying to plan ahead." He did not answer her immediately. He looked at me instead, and for the first time that evening I saw my son clearly. Not strong, not blameless, but ashamed. "For not coming to you first," he said. "For letting this happen like this. For acting like your house was a math problem instead of your home." The apology did not fix the evening. It did not erase the brochures or the market report or the way he had allowed Brooke to choreograph my future, as though I were already fading into the wallpaper. But it was honest, and at my age I have learned not to sneer at honest things simply because they arrive late. I nodded once. "That is a beginning," I said. Brooke gave a short brittle laugh. "A beginning for what? We are all supposed to pretend nothing needs to be decided." I folded Frank's letter carefully and returned it to my bag. "No," I said. "We are going to decide one thing very clearly tonight. My life will not be managed through side conversations and staged concern. If there are ever questions about my future, they will be asked directly to me, in private, with respect. And the answer may still be no." Brooke opened her mouth, then closed it again. There are moments when people realize they are no longer speaking from authority but from exposure. This was one of them. Daniel stood and gathered the brochures and papers without ceremony. He stacked them, closed the folder, and handed it to Brooke. "Throw this away," he said. "And call your friend tomorrow. There will be no more comparisons, no more planning around my mother." She looked at him as if she wanted to argue, but something in his face must have told her the evening had moved beyond her control. She rose, carried the folder into the kitchen, and I heard the soft thud of it hitting the trash beneath the sink. When she returned, she did not sit at the head of the table. She took the chair nearest the hallway and kept her eyes on the lilies. I pushed back my chair and stood. For 1 second Brooke looked almost alarmed, perhaps expecting tears or a dramatic exit she could later describe in her favor. Instead, I walked to the place where I had always sat, beside the china cabinet, across from where Daniel used to grin at Frank and try to steal an extra roll before dinner. My old chair was still there, tucked in neatly as though it had done nothing wrong. I laid one hand on its carved back and pulled it out. The sound was small, just wood sliding over hardwood, but in that room it rang clear as a bell. Then I carried my water glass and napkin to that place and sat down. No one stopped me. "This," I said, looking at my son, "is where I belong when I am invited as family and not handled as logistics." Daniel's eyes filled before he looked down. Brooke stared at me, and for once she had nothing polished to say. A moment later, Sophie appeared halfway down the stairs. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I looked up at her and smiled, not the tight smile I had worn all evening, but a real one. "It will be," I said. "Come help me wrap the leftovers." She came down at once. Mason followed with 3 jelly beans in his palm like treasure. Daniel brought out containers. I covered the casserole dish. Sophie gave me the pink egg she had saved, and I told her I thought I had earned it. No one mentioned Westerville again. No one touched the subject of my house. When it was time for me to leave, Daniel walked me to the front door alone. The evening air was cool and smelled of damp grass and spring flowers. He held my coat the way Frank used to. "I will come by this week," he said. "Not to talk about plans. Just to see you." I studied his face for a moment, measuring the man against the boy I had raised, and somewhere between the two I found enough truth to answer kindly. "Come if you mean it," I said. "Not because guilt is still fresh." He nodded once. "I mean it." I believed he wanted to. Sometimes that is the best beginning a family gets after it has shown you its worst. I drove home just after sunset. The dogwood tree in my yard was blooming pale against the darkening sky, and the porch light I always left on for myself glowed through the front window. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the house no longer felt lonely. It felt protected. Frank had done that for me long before I knew I would need it. And I had done it for myself the moment I refused to let a changed seat become a changed life. Some people think dignity is loud. They think it arrives with shouting, tears, or slammed doors. But I have learned something different. Dignity is sometimes no more than seeing the trap, staying calm long enough to understand it, and then moving back to the place that was always yours. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new stories.